Alright, brace yourself because this tale is about to take an unexpected turn and even now I still can't fully make sense of it all. It all began with a party, one that I hosted, but it ended in a way I never saw coming. Let me walk you through the night. Emily, my wife, turned my entire world upside down without even attempting to hide the smug look on her face as she did it. Emily has always had a certain magnetism about her. She's the type of person who can enter a room and instantly capture everyone's attention, making them laugh and charm them effortlessly. It was that energy that first drew me to her years ago, making me believe, this is it, she's the one. And she was, at least, that's what I thought, until the night everything started falling apart. She decided to host a party for me, but not just any party. This one was grand, extravagant even. Our living room, kitchen, and even the backyard were packed with people. There were friends, acquaintances, and even some faces I swear I had never seen before. And right in the midst of all this was Emily, stealing the spotlight. She wore this dazzling dress, far too fancy for a casual gathering at home. She glided through the crowd like she was hosting an award ceremony. Every time her eyes met mine, she gave me this look like she was asking, "Isn't this great, darling?" But it felt forced, a little too rehearsed. And then there was him, the guy I didn't recognize. Tall, handsome, the type of man who knows exactly how good-looking he is. I watched as he chatted with Emily, leaning in close to whisper something that made her laugh out loud, a laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. It sliced through the chatter in the room, and for a moment everything felt off. I wanted to approach them, maybe crack a joke to ease the tension and feel involved, but something held me back, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground could give way any second. The party kept going, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, leaning in close to that guy, his hand brushing her arm as if they shared some private joke. Emily kept catching my gaze across the room, raising her glass and smiling as though she knew exactly what she was doing to me. And then came the toast. Emily climbed onto a chair, holding a glass of champagne and tapping it with a spoon to silence the crowd. She called for everyone's attention, her voice slicing through the noise. "Everyone, everyone," she said. "I want to make a toast to my wonderful husband, Mark." I felt every eye on me as I awkwardly raised my glass. I forced a smile, but Emily's gaze was locked on mine, and there was something in her eyes that made my skin crawl, something almost predatory. "To Mark," she said, her smile sharp, "the most trusting, most loyal husband a girl could ever ask for." Her eyes flickered to that tall guy for just a moment, but it was enough for me to notice. The smirk on her lips told me this wasn't a heartfelt compliment. There was something else behind it, something dark and twisted hiding beneath the surface. The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking together, and laughter echoed around us, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I looked over at the guy again. He was raising his glass to me, his expression cold and amused, as though he knew something I didn't. And that's when it hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't a toast to celebrate me. No, it was a toast to mock me. Emily had turned this night, a party meant for me, into something entirely different. A wave of dread washed over me as my stomach sank. The rest of the evening was a blur. I wandered through the party like a ghost, wearing a smile that felt more like a mask, shaking hands, nodding at well-wishers, but all I could focus on was Emily and that guy. Together, they whispered to each other, exchanged glances that felt too intimate for my comfort. Every time I caught Emily's eye, she just smiled at me, this cold, detached smile that made my skin crawl. It wasn't until later, after most of the guests had left, that I finally had a moment alone with her. I pulled her aside into the kitchen and demanded, "Who was that guy?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, my frustration spilling over. Emily raised an eyebrow as though I had just asked the most absurd question. "Oh, relax, Mark," she said, her voice laced with condescension. "He's just a friend. Why are you acting so paranoid?" She tilted her head, giving me that same smile. This time, it was colder, more distant, like she couldn't care less. But I wasn't ready to let it go. "That didn't look like just a friend," I said, my voice trembling. The desperation in my tone made me sick, and I hated it. I hated that she had this power over me. Emily sighed and rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. You always do this, you know that." She turned away, picked up a champagne flute, and began swirling the last bit of the drink around as if she couldn't care less about anything I was saying. I couldn't believe how effortlessly she dismissed my feelings as if they meant nothing to her. She simply turned her back on me and with a sigh, continued to play her little game, her indifference cutting deeper than any words could. I could tell she wasn't going to make this easy. Her voice was flat, almost dismissive as she said, "You need to trust me, Mark. Otherwise, what's the point?" And just like that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, holding on to a flood of questions that she had no intention of answering. The following day, the weight of what had happened at the party lingered like an unwelcome shadow. I couldn't get the image of Emily's face out of my mind. Her smirk, that cold smile, and the way she turned away as though my concerns were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, it kept replaying in my head. Every time I thought about it, the hurt deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had snapped and I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I needed answers. Was I imagining things, or had Emily really been mocking me in front of everyone? The idea that she could turn the entire night into a joke, with me as the punchline, made my stomach churn. When she left for work the next morning, something inside me shifted. I did something I never thought I would. I grabbed her phone. I knew the passcode. After all, she always said she had nothing to hide, so it was nothing complicated. I never wanted to be that person, the one snooping around, invading her privacy. But after the way she had looked at that guy, the way she had laughed at me, it was a feeling I couldn't ignore. My hands trembled as I unlocked her phone. What I found confirmed my worst fear, though it was exactly what I had been dreading. There were multiple texts with someone named Tyler, the smug guy from the party. These messages stretched back for weeks, even months. Some of them were from nights she claimed to be out with her friends, things that made my stomach twist in knots. One message caught my eye. She had texted him, "Can't wait to see you," and sent a picture of herself in the same outfit I thought was meant for a girl's night. His replies were the kind of things that made me blush with embarrassment, filled with compliments and jokes, many of them about me, things she had clearly shared with him. But it was one message that shattered my entire world. "Tomorrow's the night. You'll see just how easy it is," she had written the night before the party. His response was even worse. "Can't wait to make your loyal hubby the joke of the year." It hit me like a punch to the gut. That toast, the way she had looked at me, the laughter that filled the room, it had all been planned. She had invited him there on purpose, to show him how clueless I was, to make me look like a fool in front of everyone. I felt nauseous. I had to sit down on the kitchen floor, her phone still in my hand. My heart was pounding so violently it felt like it might explode. How could she do this to me? How could she stand in front of me every day, telling me she loved me while secretly plotting this betrayal behind my back? It wasn't just about the cheating, it was the cruelty of it all. The way she had turned it into a joke, flaunted it, and then accused me of being paranoid. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay home, not with all the reminders of Emily everywhere, the wedding photos on the wall, the blanket she had bought for the couch, everything taunting me. So I left. I drove aimlessly with no destination in mind, trying to escape the crushing weight in my chest. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, a quiet, empty place where I could be alone with my thoughts. I ordered a drink, then another, but nothing seemed to help. Emily's face kept haunting me, the way she had laughed at me, dismissed me. I felt like an idiot. How had I missed all of this? How had I ever believed her when she said she loved me while she was planning something like this behind my back? As I stared at my drink, something inside me solidified. I couldn't just ignore this. I couldn't let her turn me into her personal joke. I needed to confront her, not in some desperate, pleading way, but with the truth right in front of her. No more lies, no more escape. I needed her to see that I wasn't the fool she thought I was, that I knew exactly what she had been doing. When I got back home, it was already late. Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, acting like nothing had changed. She looked up when I entered, and the curious expression on her face quickly shifted to irritation as soon as she saw my own. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice cold, sharp. "I tried calling you." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to her and handed her phone to her. "You left this?" I said, my voice icy, almost unrecognizable to myself. She frowned, taking it from me. "So what?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "You could have just left it." But I noticed something in her eyes, a flicker of nervousness hiding behind the irritation. I read the messages. "Emily?" I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the anger bubbling up inside me. Her face drained of color. For a moment, she just stared at me, her composure slipping as I watched her mask crumble. "What messages?" she said, her voice trembling slightly as her eyes darted to the side. I shook my head, anger surging. Don't play dumb. Not now. I witnessed everything. I know about Tyler. I know about the party. I understand it was all carefully orchestrated to make me look like a fool." Emily's mouth opened, only to close once more. She averted her gaze, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But just as quickly, her expression became cold and distant. She stood up, crossing her arms defensively, her eyes flashing with anger. "So what if I did?" she snapped, her voice rising with each word. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, I wouldn't have had to find someone else to actually have some fun. You're always so predictable, Mark. It's boring. Her words struck me like a slap, each one leaving a deeper mark than the last. The room felt like it was spinning, as if the air had been sucked right out. Deep down, I had always suspected she was capable of betrayal, but hearing it from her, hearing the disdain in her voice, shattered something inside of me. I staggered back a step, my fists clenching at my sides, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Rage, sadness, disbelief all battling inside me. All this time, and you couldn't even be decent enough to just end it? I asked, my voice trembling. You had to make me the laughingstock? You had to humiliate me? Emily shrugged indifferently, her face blank and almost detached. I guess I just wanted to see how far I could push it. And guess what? You fell for it. Every single step of the way. And just like that, the last remaining hope I had, the hope that maybe this was all just a misunderstanding, that maybe we could talk things through, vanished. Her words echoed in my mind, hollow and merciless. You fell for it, every step of the way. There was no more pretending. The mask had fallen, and the person standing in front of me wasn't my wife. Not the Emily I had believed I knew. The woman before me now was someone else entirely. Someone who took pleasure in breaking me. I didn't even notice I was shaking until I tried to speak. My voice barely came out, strained and weak. So this is it? I whispered. You did all of this just to hurt me? I searched her eyes for any sign of remorse, anything that would show a shred of humanity, but there was nothing. Emily's lips twisted into a cruel smile. You never understood, did you, Mark? She said, walking past me towards the kitchen, not even sparing me a glance. You were always just convenient. Someone to be there when it was easy. Someone to make me look good. She opened the fridge, took out a bottle of wine, and began uncorking it as though this was just another ordinary evening. The calmness of her actions made my blood boil. My hands tightened around the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. And what about us? I demanded, my voice rising now, the anger finally piercing through the shock. What about everything we built together? What about the promises we made? Or did all of that mean nothing to you? She poured herself a glass of wine without even offering me one, still not looking my way. Promises? Emily scoffed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. God, Mark, do you even hear yourself? We were just two kids who had no idea what we were getting into. You may have stayed that way, but I grew up. I moved on. You're the one who's stuck. Her eyes finally met mine, cold and unfeeling. It's not my fault if you couldn't keep up. Something inside of me snapped. I realized in that moment I was done. Done trying to understand her. Done trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. There was nothing left to salvage. You know what, Emily? I said, my voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. Maybe I was stuck, but at least I was honest. At least I was committed. I didn't make it my mission to tear you down, to turn your life into a joke. She waved her hand dismissively, as though my words were meaningless. Honestly, Mark, why are you still here? If you're so hurt, if I'm such a horrible person, then just leave. She turned away, taking her wine glass with her, walking toward the living room as though she had just won some great victory. The room seemed to spin, but my mind became clearer than ever. She wanted me to leave? Fine, but I wasn't going anywhere quietly. I followed her, my heart pounding, and snatched the wine glass from her hand, slamming it down onto the coffee table. The glass shattered, spilling dark red wine across the table, staining the rug beneath. For the first time that evening, Emily looked genuinely surprised. Don't think you're getting away without consequences, I said, my voice cold, each word as sharp as steel. You think you can humiliate me, parade around with some guy in my house, in front of my friends, and just walk away like nothing happened? I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. You've been lying, cheating, using me, and now you expect me to just disappear quietly? I continued. That's not happening, Emily. She stepped back, her eyes wide for just a moment before narrowing again, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, now you're going to get tough?" she sneered, though I could tell she was rattled. "What, Mark? You're going to make a scene now? Act like some tough guy after letting all of this go on for months." She tried to laugh, but it came out hollow forced. I could tell that the reaction I gave her wasn't at all what she had expected. A cold smile played on my lips as I shook my head. "No, Emily, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to play along with whatever twisted game you think this is." Turning, I headed toward the hallway closet, pulling it open. I grabbed a duffel bag and started tossing clothes into it. "I'm leaving, sure, but not without ensuring everyone knows exactly what you've done. Every friend, every coworker, and every person you tried so hard to impress last night, they're all going to know the real you." She stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I could see the shock and realization start to dawn on her, that things weren't going to go the way she'd planned. She had thought I would beg, that I would break down and let her walk all over me one final time. But instead, I was reclaiming whatever dignity I had left. I zipped up the duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and made my way to the door. Just before I stepped out, I turned to face her one last time. My eyes locked with hers, and there was nothing in them, no warmth, no sorrow, just cold resolve. "Enjoy your freedom, Emily. You wanted me gone, and you got your wish. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you walk away from this looking like the victim. You did this. You made your choices. And I want you to remember that when everyone else sees the real you." With that, I opened the door, stepping out into the cold night. I slammed the door shut behind me, but I could still hear her yelling, whether it was my name or some insult, it didn't matter. I walked to my car, threw the bag into the back seat, and climbed in. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, but for the first time in ages, I actually felt like I could breathe again. I started the car and didn't know exactly where I was going, but I didn't care. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with feeling like I wasn't enough. I had allowed her to control my life for far too long, but that was over now. As I drove away, watching the house fade into the distance through the rearview mirror, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I was leaving behind the wreckage of a life I thought I wanted, but maybe this was what I truly needed. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I wasn't running from anything, I was moving forward, and I wasn't looking back. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. The city lights flickered past, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the pavement. I kept replaying every word of that conversation, every mocking smile that had crossed Emily's face. I couldn't shake it off. I knew I needed something more. Walking away wasn't enough. She needed to face the consequences of what she had done. I ended up at a rest stop, the engine still running as I stared at the dashboard, lost in thought. My mind was racing, angry, hurt, and even a little exhilarated. I had walked out on her, sure, but that wasn't going to be the end of it. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I stopped at Eric's name. Eric was one of my oldest friends, someone who had known Emily just as long as I had. He had been there at the party, one of the few who stayed late and had seen the strange atmosphere that night. I remembered him asking me, jokingly, if I was okay with how close Emily was getting to that tall guy, Tyler. Back then I had brushed it off, too embarrassed to admit that I felt the same tension. But now I needed him. I needed someone who would stand by me, someone who could help me see this through. I pressed the call button. The phone rang, and for a moment I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But then Eric answered, his voice groggy. "Mark? It's late, man. Everything okay?" I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "No, Eric. It's not okay. Can we talk? It's about Emily." There was a long pause on the other end. "Emily? What happened?" Eric's tone shifted, now filled with concern. I let out a shaky breath, gathering the strength to speak. "She's been cheating on me. With that guy, Tyler, from the party. It's been going on for months, and the party? It was all a setup. She turned me into a joke right in front of everyone." The words spilled out faster than I intended, my throat tightening as I spoke. Admitting it felt like ripping off a wound and letting it bleed. "Jesus, Mark? What?" Eric's voice trailed off, and I could hear the shock in it. I knew something was off that night, but I never thought. He stopped, and then, with a shift in his tone, one I recognized as the mix of anger and loyalty, he added, "What do you need?" "Whatever it is, I'm in." I felt a brief flicker of gratitude. It was the first real warmth I had felt all night. "I need people to know, Eric. She's twisted everything to make me look like the fool. I can't allow her to walk away from this without confronting the truth." Eric didn't hesitate. "All right, we can do that," he said. "Do you remember the photos from the party? The ones where she was all over that guy? I can send them out. People need to know what she really is." His words triggered something inside me, a realization. It wasn't just about me knowing what had happened anymore. It was about the people around us, the friends, the ones who believed we were this perfect couple, getting a glimpse of the reality of who Emily truly was. She had made a mockery of me, turning my loyalty into a public spectacle. Now it was her turn. "Do it," I said, my voice steady, a chill determination settling in my chest. "Send them to everyone who was at the party. Let them see exactly what kind of person Emily is." Eric agreed, and I ended the call, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. What I was doing wasn't about doing the right thing anymore. It was about regaining the control she had taken from me, about making sure she wouldn't be able to laugh at me again. The following morning, I woke up in a dingy motel room, its thin curtains barely filtering the early sunlight. A weight settled in my chest, but under it was something else, purpose. I wasn't going to let her cruelty define me anymore. I was going to stand my ground. I reached for my phone, which buzzed with new notifications. Eric had sent the photos, and that wasn't all. He'd written a message to go with them, detailing what Emily had done, how she had set me up, and how Tyler had been complicit. He hadn't held back any details, and as I scrolled through the responses, I could feel the tide shifting. Shock. Disbelief. Anger. People I had once believed were closer to Emily than me were now expressing their fury on my behalf, checking if I was okay, offering their support. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was facing this alone. People were seeing the real Emily, the one who had humiliated me, who had delighted in tearing me apart. And now they were standing with me. My phone buzzed again. It was Eric. "Mark, you need to see this," he said. "Emily posted something." My stomach twisted as I opened the post. There she was, her face pale, her expression carefully neutral. Emily had written a lengthy message, attempting to paint herself as the victim, talking about privacy and how things weren't always what they seemed. She was trying to shift the narrative to make it look like I was overreacting, like I was the one who had gone too far. But the comments told a different story. People were calling her out, demanding explanations for the photos, questioning why she'd invited Tyler to the party in the first place if it was all so innocent. I watched as her story unraveled in real time, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt a strange sense of justice. She couldn't hide anymore. As I read through the comments, one message stood out, a private message from someone I didn't recognize. It was Tyler. I hesitated, then opened it, my jaw tightening as I read his words. "Mark, we need to talk." I didn't know she was going to do this. It was never supposed to go this far. The nerve of him nearly made me laugh. He was reaching out now, trying to cover his own back after everything. I stared at the message, my hands shaking with anger. He was just as involved as Emily, no matter how much he tried to deny it. He had been there, mocking me, enjoying the whole situation. He was guilty too. I thought about responding, about telling him exactly what I thought, but I stopped myself. No, he wasn't worth my time. None of them were. Emily, Tyler, they were all lies. Poison. I needed to cut them out of my life for good, not keep letting them infect it. I blocked the message and took a deep breath. Glancing out the window, the sky was clear, the sun shining bright, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally see a way forward. This wasn't over yet. I knew there would be more fallout, more attempts from Emily to twist the story to her advantage. But that was okay because I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had already faced the worst she could throw at me, and I had survived. Now it was time to rebuild, to create something stronger, something truly mine, from the wreckage she had left behind. The day felt surreal, like a fever dream. My phone kept buzzing, notifications flooding in from friends, acquaintances, even people I hadn't heard from in years. Word had spread, and everyone had something to say. There were messages of support, disbelief, and anger. Some were furious on my behalf, others just wanted to know the juicy details. Then there were those who had heard from Emily. Her efforts to shift the narrative, to protect her image, were failing miserably, and no one was believing her. I could sense how much that bothered her. Emily had always been meticulous about the persona she projected to the world. Everything was perfectly crafted. Her career, her relationship, and every post on her social media designed to create a life that others could envy. She thrived on being admired, on being the person everyone looked up to. Now all of that was falling apart. She was losing control, and that terrified her. By midday, I found myself heading back into the city. I wasn't eager to return to the house. It had become tainted, filled with too many memories I couldn't shake. But I needed to see her. I needed closure, to face her one final time now that the truth was out. This had stopped being just about her betrayal. It had become about standing up to the person who tried to destroy me, showing her I wasn't afraid. When I arrived at the house, I saw her car parked in the driveway. My heart raced as I approached the front steps, the keys heavy in my hand. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the silence of the house oddly unsettling. I paused for a moment, taking in the scene. The photos still hung on the walls, snapshots of us on a beach vacation, another from a friend's wedding. Images of us seemingly happy and in love. They now felt like relics from another lifetime, a life that never truly existed. "Emily?" I called, my voice echoing through the empty house. I heard movement from the living room before she appeared, her face a mixture of anger and something else. Fear. Maybe. It was the first time I had ever seen that look in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. "You've done enough already, Mark. You've turned everyone against me. You've humiliated me." I almost laughed darkly, the absurdity of her words overwhelming. "I've humiliated you?" I echoed, stepping closer. "You threw a party just to make me the joke, Emily. You brought Tyler here in front of all our friends just to watch me suffer. And now you want to play the victim." She opened her mouth but quickly shut it, her eyes flashing with what seemed like desperation. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was just tired of everything. Tired of you always being so predictable." She struggled to find the right words, her fists clenched. "You never challenged me, Mark. You were always just there and I wanted more. Tyler, he was exciting. He made me feel alive." The words stung, but they no longer shocked me. I had already heard the worst, and now it felt like she was simply making excuses for her actions, trying to justify the unjustifiable. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on her. The woman I had once loved, the one I thought I would spend my life with, was gone. Maybe she had never been there at all. "You wanted more?" I said coldly, my voice steady. "So you decided to destroy what we had instead of just leaving? You couldn't walk away. You had to turn it into a game, had to make me suffer." She looked away, her jaw tight. "You wouldn't have let me go," she whispered, barely audible. "You would have fought for us, and I didn't want that. I wanted you to hate me. I wanted you to be the one to leave so I wouldn't feel guilty." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "Well, congratulations, Emily," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You got what you wanted. I'm leaving." I paused, letting the weight of it settle between us. "But I need you to understand something. You didn't break me. You tried, but you failed. Now everyone knows exactly who you are. You wanted freedom, and you've got it. But good luck finding someone who will trust you after this." Her eyes filled with tears, but I could see the anger beneath them, the frustration of not being able to manipulate her way out of this situation. "You think you're so righteous, Mark?" she spat, her voice full of venom. "You think you're better than me just because you're hurt? Because you walked away? You're just a coward. Running away instead of trying to fix this." I stood there, staring at her, and an unexpected calm washed over me. "You're right," I said, my voice unwavering. "I am running away from you, from everything you've done, because there's nothing left here to fix. You destroyed it, and I'm done letting you drag me down with you." She flinched, tears spilling over, but I felt nothing. The love I once had for her, the pain of her betrayal, even the anger. All of it felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. I turned away, walking toward the door. The house seemed smaller, emptier with every step. "Mark, wait!" she called out, her voice breaking. "Please, we can talk about this." I paused with my hand on the doorknob but didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say, Emily. You made your choice. Now you'll have to live with it." I opened the door and stepped outside, the cold air slapping my face. I closed the door behind me, the sound echoing in the silence. For a brief moment, I stood there, taking in a deep breath, letting the finality of the situation sink in. I was leaving behind everything. My house, the memories, the life I once thought I had. As I made my way toward my car, I could feel the heaviness slowly lifting. Emily could cry, twist the narrative however she wished, but it didn't matter anymore. She no longer had any power over me. I had faced her, seen the truth of who she was, and walked away. I slid into my car, turned the engine over, and watched the house shrink in my rearview mirror as I drove off. I had no clear destination in mind, but for the first time I felt okay with that. I didn't need a plan or to know what would come next. All that mattered was that I kept moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged, never glancing back. The familiar streets eventually gave way to unfamiliar ones, and as I drove deeper into the city, the rows of suburban houses turned into the heart of the bustling urban center. The crowded buildings towered over me like a fortress, filled with lights and noise. The rush of adrenaline that had fueled me during the confrontation faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I knew I needed somewhere to stay for the night, far from the house and all the painful memories I had just left behind. I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a rundown motel. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked pavement. The man at the front desk barely looked up from his television as I handed over the cash for a room key. The room was small, with a faint smell of bleach lingering in the air. The bed was covered in a dated floral comforter, but I didn't care. It was a place to sleep, to escape her. I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling, but my mind wouldn't quiet. The events of the past day played on a loop. Emily's cruel toast at the party, the hurtful texts, and the coldness in her eyes as she tried to justify everything she had done. No matter how hard I tried to shut it out, it all came rushing back. I could still hear her voice, telling me that I was predictable, that I hadn't challenged her, that she wanted me to hate her so she wouldn't have to feel guilty. What kind of person does that to someone they once claimed to love? I couldn't stay there, drowning in those thoughts. I needed to get away, to remind myself there was more to life than all the chaos I had just left behind. Grabbing my phone, I called the one person I knew I could rely on. "Hey, Mark." Eric's voice crackled through the line. "You all right?" "Not really," I admitted, my voice small in the quiet room. "I need to get out of here, Eric. I need a change of scenery, a distraction. I just can't be alone right now." Without a moment's hesitation, he responded, "Say no more. I'll be there in an hour. We'll grab a drink, clear your head. Whatever you need, man." True to his word, Eric pulled into the motel parking lot just under an hour later. When I got into his car, he took one look at my face and sighed, shaking his head. "Damn, Mark. I knew it was bad. But seeing you now, it just hits different." I gave a tired smile, shrugging. "Yeah, well, nothing really prepares you for watching your whole life fall apart." He put a firm hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this. Let's just get you out of your head for a bit." Eric started the car, and we soon found ourselves weaving through the city streets, heading to a bar we used to frequent right after college, before adult responsibilities had piled up. The bar was loud, packed with people, and exactly what I needed. Somewhere to lose myself in the noise and chaos of other people's lives. Eric ordered us both beers, and we took a seat in a corner booth away from the crowd. He didn't press me to talk. Instead, he started telling me about the ridiculous office politics he had been dealing with. I found myself laughing, even if just a little, for the first time in what felt like forever. As we sat there, the beer easing my anxiety, Eric paused and turned to me, his expression serious. "You know, man, I've been thinking a lot about this. What Emily did. It's on her. You can't blame yourself for not seeing it sooner. People like her know how to hide who they are. They manipulate, they lie, and they make you believe you're the one with the problem. It's not your fault." I lowered my eyes, looking at my drink. "I just feel so stupid, Eric. The signs were all there, and I ignored them. I wanted to believe so badly that she loved me. I let her walk all over me. Let her make me look like an idiot in front of everyone." "Mark, you loved her," Eric said firmly. "That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a hell of a lot better than being the kind of person who uses love as a weapon. You've got a heart, man, and she lost that. That's her loss, not yours." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't about me being weak or foolish. It might have simply been the fact that I had once loved someone who ultimately didn't deserve it. It was something I never could have foreseen, and it was beyond my control now. As we finished our drinks and stepped out of the bar, I felt a surprising lightness, like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The crisp night air greeted me as we walked outside, and I glanced up at the sky. The stars were barely visible against the glow of the city's lights. Eric looked at me, his gaze searching for something in my expression. "You don't have to figure it all out right away," he said, his voice steady. "You have time, Mark. Take things day by day. You'll get through this mess, one step at a time." I nodded, the tightness in my chest loosening a bit more. "Thanks, Eric. I really mean it. I'm not sure what I'd do without you right now." He smiled and gave me a reassuring pat on the back. "That's what friends are for, right? You've always had my back, and now it's my turn to do the same for you. You're not alone in this." The drive back to the motel was quiet, my mind wandering to everything I had lost, to everything that had been destroyed. Yet, I kept thinking about what Eric had said, one step at a time. I didn't have to let her take anything else from me. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was starting to think that, just maybe, there was a way forward. When we got back to the motel, Eric gave me a hug before heading off. I stood there for a moment, watching his car drive away down the road before turning back toward my room. I was utterly drained, the kind of exhaustion that sank deep into my bones. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I had the sense that I might actually be able to sleep. Inside the room, I sat down on the edge of the bed. My mind was calmer now. I began thinking about the future, about what I wanted to do next. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Emily's betrayal define me. She had tried to break me, but she hadn't succeeded. I picked up my phone and saw messages from friends who had reached out. People who still cared about me, who saw me for who I was, not the fool Emily had tried to make me. I quickly typed back a simple thank you to a couple of them, letting them know I appreciated their support. It felt like a small but important step, reaching out, letting others back in, instead of pushing them away. As I lay back on the bed, a small glimmer of hope began to flicker inside me. It was fragile, but it was there, enough to hold onto. The pain was still there, as was the anger, but it no longer consumed me. There was room for something else, something new, something better, and it was slowly growing. As I closed my eyes, I allowed myself to imagine a life without Emily. A life where I was free of her lies and cruelty. It was still unclear, still uncertain, but it was my life, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, a flood of notifications lighting up the screen. Still groggy, I reached over, expecting more check-ins from friends. But what I saw made my stomach churn. There were dozens of missed calls and texts, most from numbers I didn't recognize. Some were from acquaintances, others from people I hadn't spoken to in years, and a few were from mutual friends I shared with Emily. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, scrolling through the messages. They weren't just supportive messages. They were full of stories, personal accounts from others who had been manipulated by Emily. People were reaching out, sharing how Emily had lied to them, used them for favors, and discarded them when they were no longer useful. Some had seen the same cruelty I had experienced but hadn't fully understood it. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and what I saw was far worse than I'd imagined. Emily had hurt so many others. She had used friends, played people against each other, and manipulated relationships for her own benefit. A wave of nausea hit me as I read each message. One woman shared how Emily had destroyed her friendship by spreading false rumors. Another guy talked about how he had been strung along until Emily found someone else she could use. It felt as though Emily's betrayal of me had opened the floodgates, and now all her past actions were coming to light. But then there was something I hadn't expected. Tyler had posted a public apology. I could hardly believe my eyes, but there it was, clear as day. In his message, he admitted how he'd gotten caught up in Emily's lies, how he had believed her when she painted me as some kind of monster, claiming our marriage was over, that I was holding her back. He expressed regret for being part of it, for playing a role in humiliating me, and apologized for not seeing what kind of person Emily truly was until it was too late. At first, I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. Part of me wanted to accept his apology, to think that perhaps he had been manipulated as well. However, another side of me, still wounded and filled with anger, wanted to reject it entirely. He knew what he was doing, at least on some level. He had seen the pain in my eyes at that party, witnessed the cracks appearing, and still, he chose to be a part of Emily's twisted scheme. Nevertheless, there was a sense of victory. Emily had lost control over her narrative, and even her accomplice was now turning against her. This was more than I had hoped for when I walked out of that house the previous day. She had built her entire life on lies, and now those lies were falling apart. But I also understood this couldn't be the final chapter. Not for me. As gratifying as it was to see her exposed, as satisfying as it felt to know that others were finally seeing her true nature, it didn't fill the emptiness she had left behind. It didn't erase the months of uncertainty, the sleepless nights spent wondering what I had done wrong, or the humiliation from the party she had orchestrated. I didn't want revenge or retribution. What I needed was a way to rebuild. I got out of bed, splashed cold water on my face in the small motel bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked exhausted, older in some way, but there was a fire in my eyes, something I hadn't felt for a long time. It was time to start thinking about the future, about what came next, and how to rebuild my life without her. The first step was to get some distance. Not just physically from Emily and everything that reminded me of her, but emotionally too. I needed to put up walls, to stop allowing her presence to define every thought I had. She was losing control over her story, but I had to take control of mine. I picked up my phone again and began browsing rental listings. There was no way I could stay in that house we had shared, filled with memories of her. I needed a new space, somewhere that was entirely mine, somewhere untouched by her presence. I scrolled through endless listings, apartments, small houses, anything that could be a fresh start. At first, it was overwhelming. I had never lived alone before. Emily and I had moved in together right after college, and before that, it was always roommates or shared living spaces. But as I flipped through photos of tiny kitchens, cozy living rooms, and small balconies with scenic views, something began to shift inside me. There was a flicker of excitement, a sense of possibility, a sense that this could be something entirely new, something that was mine alone. I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was clean and bright. I called the number to set up an appointment for later that day. It was time to take the first step toward moving on. Just as I was about to leave the motel room, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an old friend, Kelly. She had been close to both Emily and me, someone I hadn't spoken to since everything had happened. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Kelly," I said. "Mark," her voice was soft, tentative. "I saw everything online. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I can't believe what Emily did. I knew she had a side to her, but this. I'm so sorry." I sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thanks, Kelly. I'm getting by. It's been rough, but honestly, I think I'm starting to see a way out of this." "I'm glad to hear that," she responded. There was something in her voice that made me pause. "Listen, Mark, I want you to know you're not alone in this. A lot of us, me, Eric, and others, we're all here for you. We're getting together tonight, just a small group, to catch up. It might help take your mind off things. I think it would be good for you." I was silent for a moment, feeling a tightness in my chest. Part of me wanted to decline, to retreat and continue hiding from everyone. But another part of me, a part that was tired of hiding, wanted to say yes. I wanted to step back into the world, to remind myself that I still had people who cared about me, people who saw me as more than just the guy Emily tried to destroy. "All right," I finally said, my voice steady. "I'll come. I think I need that." "Good," Kelly replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We'll be at the Rusty Tap around 8. We'll save you a seat." As I hung up, a strange mix of anxiety and hope washed over me. It wasn't going to be easy facing people who had seen me at my lowest, but I knew I couldn't keep running. If I wanted to move forward, I had to take the first step. I packed up my things, checked out of the motel, and drove to the address for the apartment listing. The street was quiet, and the building was older but well-maintained, with a small courtyard in front. The landlord, a friendly middle-aged woman, met me there and led me up to the 3rd floor. As we walked, she chatted about the neighborhood and the other tenants. The apartment was modest, with simple white walls and hardwood floors and sunlight pouring in through the windows. It wasn't anything like the house I had once shared with Emily, but that was exactly what I needed. After a brief tour, I shook hands with the landlord, signed the lease, and paid the deposit. It was official now. I had a new place, a fresh beginning. I didn't have any furniture or a concrete plan, but I held the key in my hand, knowing that this was the first real step toward taking my life back. As I left the building, I glanced at my phone, noticing the time was edging closer to evening. I still had a couple of hours before I was meeting Eric, Kelly, and the others. My mind wandered as I thought about everything that had unfolded and everything yet to come, the packing, the paperwork, the difficult conversations I'd still need to face, and the healing that would take time. It felt overwhelming but also exhilarating. I realized as I drove away from the apartment that I had finally closed the door on Emily. She had taken so much from me, my trust, my confidence, and the future I thought I was building, but she hadn't taken it all. I still had myself. I still had the people who truly cared for me, those who saw me for who I was, not the version she had tried to paint. And as the sun sank lower in the sky, casting warm hues of orange and pink, I let myself fully embrace the moment. This was the start of something new, the gradual but steady climb out of the darkness she had cast me into. There was still a long road ahead, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The evening at the Rusty Tap was a whirlwind of emotions, but it was exactly what I needed. The bar was busy, bustling with people, but we managed to find a corner where we could slip into our own little space, away from the noise. Eric was already sitting at the table when I arrived, a pint in front of him, his face lighting up with a smile when he saw me. Kelly waved from the other side of the booth, and beside her were a few more familiar faces, people who had been part of my life before everything with Emily fell apart. I took a deep breath and made my way over. Before I even had a chance to sit down, Kelly pulled me into a tight hug. "It's so good to see you, Mark," she said, her voice warm and sincere. I could feel the weight I had been carrying for days begin to lift a little. As I sat down in the booth, the conversation started to flow. At first, everyone danced around the difficult subject, but I decided to break the ice myself. I shared the details of my confrontation with Emily, Tyler's message, and everything I had learned from the many stories that had come my way. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to let it out, to share the burden with people who actually cared. When I finished, Eric raised his glass, his eyes meeting mine. "To starting over," he said, his tone carrying just enough of an edge to show he truly meant it. "To leaving the past where it belongs." "To starting over," Kelly echoed, and everyone clinked their glasses together. I joined in, a smile touching my lips as I took a sip of my drink. The conversation gradually shifted after that, and before long, the bar was filled with laughter, jokes, and stories from simpler times. We reminisced about the good old days, road trips we had taken, concerts we had enjoyed, the kind of adventures that felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I could feel the shadows Emily had cast over me beginning to fade into the background, replaced by warmth and connection. This was what I had been missing for so long. These people, my friends, were the ones who had always been there, even when I had been too absorbed in my failing marriage to notice it. And then, as the night stretched on, something unexpected happened. Kelly leaned over, her expression softening as her eyes met mine. "You know, Mark," she said, her voice just above a whisper, "I've always admired you. You have this way of giving everything, of caring so deeply. Not everyone can do that." I blinked, taken off guard, and felt my cheeks flush. "I don't know about that," I said, trying to laugh it off. "Sometimes it feels like it's more of a weakness than a strength." She shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "It's not a weakness. It's what makes you who you are. And anyone who doesn't see that or who takes advantage of it isn't worth your time." She smiled then, a smile that reached her eyes. "You deserve better, Mark. And I think you're starting to realize that." A lump formed in my throat, a mix of gratitude and something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I smiled back at her, a genuine smile this time, and for a moment everything else in the bar seemed to fade away. "Thanks, Kelly. That means more than you know," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine, and it was a small, simple gesture, but it made me realize that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth looking forward to beyond all the chaos and heartbreak. The remainder of the night unfolded in a haze of laughter and lively conversation, and by the time we all made our way out of the bar, I felt lighter than I had in months. We stood on the sidewalk, the crisp night air enveloping us, and Eric gave me a hearty slap on the back. "Are you going to be all right, man?" he asked in a soft tone. I nodded, a smile creeping onto my face. "Yeah, I think I'm going to be fine." Kelly wrapped her arms around me in another embrace, this one lasting longer, her hold tight and reassuring. "You've got us, Mark. Don't ever forget that, okay?" "I won't," I promised her, and for the first time I knew I truly meant it. I wasn't just repeating words, I believed them. On my drive back to the motel, my mind wandered to the apartment I had just signed the lease for. I pictured it bathed in sunlight, filled with furniture I'd personally chosen, with colors and items that were entirely mine. It would be a small space, but it would mark the beginning of something new, something I could shape on my own terms. I imagined waking up there, the sun pouring through the windows, free from the shadows of Emily's lies, no lingering dread hanging over me, just me and the life I would choose to build from that moment on. The next few weeks passed in a blur of packing and organizing. I only visited the house a handful of times, mostly to collect the essentials. I didn't stick around. I took what mattered to me, an old guitar I hadn't played in years, a few beloved books, some clothes, and left the rest behind. Emily could have whatever was left. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. On the day I officially moved into my new place, Eric and Kelly came over to lend a hand. They brought pizza, beer, and plenty of laughter, and by the time the day ended, the apartment already felt more like home than the house ever had. We sat on the floor, eating straight from the pizza box, surrounded by the kind of warmth that only real friends can bring. "This is good," Eric said, raising his beer bottle in a toast. "A new chapter, no more ghosts." "No more ghosts," I repeated, clinking my bottle with his. I glanced around at the bare walls and empty shelves, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, excitement bubbled up within me. This was my space now, a fresh start, a canvas for rebuilding my life. Kelly leaned back, her eyes locking with mine across the room. She smiled, and something stirred in my chest, a feeling I didn't quite recognize, but welcomed nonetheless. "To new beginnings," she said softly. I nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the beer or the laughter. To new beginnings. The following days were filled with small victories, setting up my apartment, picking out furniture, choosing things that felt like me. Every decision, every item I added was another step away from the life I had with Emily and closer to the one I wanted to create for myself. I found myself smiling more, even laughing at things like struggling to assemble a bookshelf or messing up a dinner because I had never really learned to cook for just one person. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment watching the sun sink below the horizon, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kelly. "Hey, just thinking about you. Hope you're settling in okay. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the message for a moment, a smile spreading across my face. I typed back, "Thanks, Kelly. I think I'm finally getting the hang of this. Want to come over this weekend? I could use some help picking out a few more things for the place." Her response came quickly. "I'd love to. See you then." I set my phone down, a wave of calm washing over me. I didn't know what the future held or if something more could develop between Kelly and me. I wasn't sure if I was even ready for that yet. But one thing was clear, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't afraid of being alone, of starting over, of whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily had tried to take everything from me, but she had failed. She lost and I won, not in a petty, vindictive way, but in the quiet, powerful way of moving forward, reclaiming my life one small step at a time. I leaned back and looked out at the view, the city lights twinkling below. This was my fresh start. And for the first time, it truly felt like enough.